Savage Sullivan Math here. Welcome back. Today we're going to factor trinomials when the a value does not equal 1. So here we notice that we have an a value of 2 and a b value of 3 and a c value of -9. Remember, the very first thing that you need to do when you are factoring is look for a GCF. In this one, I know I have a 2, but 2 can't go into 3. And I also have an n, but my last term does not have an n either. So there is no greatest common factor. So then we move on. Since we do not have an a value of 1, this is a little bit different. We need to find factors that multiply up to our a times our c value. So a times c, in this case, 2 times -9 equal -18. So we need to find factors of -18. When we look for those factors of -18, we are going to see which ones can add up to that b value of +3. So this is going to be a little bit tricky. As we think about the factors of -18, when you're multiplying two numbers and the resulting product is negative, that means one of your numbers had to have been negative. So we've got, of course, -1 times 18. We've got -2 times 9. We've got -3 times 6. 4 doesn't go into 18. Either does 5. But then we've got all of these kind of in reverse, I guess you could say. So here we go. The factors of -18. Okay. Of these, which ones would add to +3? -1 plus 18 is 17. This would be a 7. -3 plus 6 would be, there we go. That's it. It would be a 3. We don't need to look any further because these are our two magic numbers. We are going to use that -3 and the +6 to replace this middle term of 3n. So I've got my 2n squared and I've got my -9, my first and my last term, but this middle term is going to be replaced with the -3n and the +6n. See that? If we were to combine like terms, we would get that original problem. Okay, we've seen this before. When you have 4 terms and you need to factor it, you factor by grouping. So there I go. I've thrown in my parentheses so I can easily see my groupings. From the first parentheses, what do I have in common? All I have in common is an n. And then left behind would be a 2n and a -3. From the second parentheses here, what I have is a +3 that they have in common. And then left behind from the 6n would be a 2n -3. Go ahead and recheck this by distributing again and make sure that you didn't make a silly Sally here. So n times 2n is 2n squared, n times -3, -3n, 3 times 2n is 6n, and 3 times -3 is -9. Phew, okay, we're doing all right here. Check this out. Remember, when you're grouping, you're hoping that these parentheses match, and we are lucky that they do. So that matching parentheses is going to be part of your final answer. That's one of the factors. And then everything that's outside is going to be grouped together in one parentheses as well. So I've got my n plus 3 there for my second binomial. So here is your final answer. You could, of course, do double distribution and double check that you have the right answer. So let's do that real quick. I'm going to take 2n times an n, so I've got 2n squared, 2n times 3, that's a 6n, -3 times n, and -3 times 3, Combine like terms, and you have your answer. Does it match? It sure does. Awesome job. This is it.
Sick work, Mrs. Sullivan. Let's kick it up a notch. So let's take a look at this trinomial. And we're going to follow the same process. So when I look at this, I see that my a value is bigger than 1. It's an 8. So, like always, our first step when we factor is to look for a greatest common factor. So when we look at this time there is a greatest common factor. The factor that I can pull out of all three of these terms is a 4. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to factor out that 4. And when I do that, I'm left with 2x squared minus 5x plus 3. So now I have smaller numbers to work with, which is going to make my life a lot easier. So when we look inside this trinomial now, I still have to factor it. And my a value is still bigger than 1. So we're going to go ahead and do exactly what Mrs. Sullivan did. We're going to start by multiplying our a value and our c value. 2 times 3. So 2 times 3 is 6. So now we need factors of positive 6 that add to negative 5. So let's think about the factors of positive 6. What are they? Well, we have to keep in mind that they have to add to negative 5. So do you think we'll have negative numbers or positive numbers? That's right. We'll need 2 negative numbers because as we know, 2 negatives multiply to get a positive, but they add to get a negative. So let's take a look. What are negative factors of 6? Well, we have negative 6 times negative 1. That would get me a positive 6. And we have negative 3 times a negative 2. That would also get me a positive 6. But remember, which of these will add to get negative 5? That's right, these two, negative 3 and negative 2. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our trinomial and we're going to rewrite this negative 5x as its factors, negative 3 and negative 2. So the 4 is going to come along for the ride. We can't forget it. And because I'm eventually going to use 2 parentheses, I'm going to go ahead and just throw a bracket in there. So now we have 2x squared. We're going to rewrite this using negative 3 and negative 2. So minus 3x minus 2x, because again, there's your negative 5x, plus 3. All right, so now it's just factoring by grouping. We know how to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to group these 2 terms together, and I'm going to group these 2 terms together, and I'm going to make sure that I take the signs with them. So when I think about greatest common factors of 2x squared and negative 3x, I'm going to pull out an x. So again, this 4 is coming down, and our greatest common factor of our first grouping is just x. And when I factor out an x, I'm left with 2x minus 3. Then I'm going to look at my second grouping. Now, I want my inside of my second parenthesis, remember, we want them to be the same. So we want it to be a 2x minus 3. In order to get that, I have to pull out a negative 1. And the reason I have to pull out the negative is because now that I pulled it out, my first term will be a 2x. If I didn't, it would be a negative 2x, and we need them to be the same. When I pull out the negative 1, I'm also going to be left with a negative 3. Because negative 1 times 2x is negative 2x, and negative 1 times negative 3 is a positive 3. So that's why we need to pull out that negative 1. So we're here now. All right, We're getting there. So then we just write it like we do with any grouping problem. Remembering that 4 is coming down, we have 4, and then we pull out our greatest common factors here of 2x minus 3, and the leftovers, as I call them, x minus 1, go in their own set of parentheses. So that big old trinomial at the top ends up factoring as 4 times 2x minus 3 times x minus 1. And like Mrs. Sullivan said, if we wanted, I could go ahead and multiply all of this out to check. Pretty cool. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe.